Hi, everyone. Welcome to Book Club Babble, the author's cut with Tabitha Lord. I'm Amy M. Hawes. I'll be your host tonight. And Tabitha, thank you for coming.
My
we have
pleasure.
we have a couple little housekeeping items we want to let you know about. If you're participating, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's if you hover on in the footer region, there's a button that says chat. Tap on that, type in your question, and I'll make sure it gets asked to Tabitha. So Tabitha, Horizon was your first book. Yay. Yes. You self-published. Can you give us a synopsis of the book for those who aren't familiar with it?
Well, it's a space opera, and the opening scene is we know that.
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt. Not everybody knows what a space opera is, so let's give a quick definition.
It's a subgenre of sci-fi. It's the kind of sci-fi that you think of when you watch Star Wars or Star Trek. It's that epic space journey, good guys, bad guys, lots of battles, some kind of moral dilemma, that sort of thing. So it's just that epic scope. And for me, it's a human story set in space. So it's not really, there aren't any alien creatures or anything like that. There's some alien futuristic tech and that sort of thing, but it's based on a colonization model that we've sort of gone out and colonized the galaxy. And so that's my premise. My protagonist has, she's alone and on the run when you meet her, and she witnesses a spaceship crash, and you see her save the injured pilot with her empathic skills, and then realizes that he's not from her world, and that in fact her world was once part of a greater galactic colonization wave. And meanwhile, on her planet, there's a rebellion, a resistance movement happening because a brutal regime has taken control and is very threatened by the empathic people there, and is trying to suppress and wipe them out. So that's the basic premise.
Yeah, and your book has one of the best opening lines ever. Would you read the first few lines for us?
I can just say them. She felt them before she saw them.
Exactly. And talk about that, like how that came to you.
Hold on a second. Heard them. She felt them before she heard them. See? I'm just nervous, that's all.
And then right away, we know she has that empathy quality. And you learn just by that one sentence, you learn so much about her in media. It's super cool. I just had to throw that out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, and talk about the seed idea you had for this book and how long it took to write and what made you get started, and
or
who.
So I sort of had always dreamed about writing, and never really thought I could bring a story from start to finish. So that was always the stumbling block. I'd written blog posts and ad copy and things like that for work and different things. But the creative piece, I had a lot of snippets of stories, but nothing that spanned an entire, like a full-length novel. That was my stumbling block, and that was my fear to get started. And I was working on a project at the school that I worked at, the accreditation project, which is a 2-year process. Anybody that's ever been through accreditation knows it's a huge deal. And I was leading the team, and I was in charge of writing the final document, which took about 9 months to write. And so I had a habit life of writing every single day. And I thought, well, you're writing every day anyway, so why not write something creative every night and see what happens? And so actually I was on your couch. I remember at Amy's house, and I woke up one morning and I had
we went to Six Flags right before, the day before. We went to Six Flags. So
yes. So we had a fun time, and I started thinking about this idea, and I had two sort of separate pieces. I had this image in my mind of the spaceship crash and and her saving, and that idea that she was empathic and was saving him. And then I had a separate idea about, well, what if there was a civilization that some of the people evolved, either were genetically modified or evolved naturally, and at the time I didn't know and it didn't matter, differently than their neighbors. Like, how would that set up a society, the tension in the society, that those that could read minds or could do things with their minds that the other couldn't, what would that do to the fabric of a culture? And so I was playing with that idea. At the same time I had this scene, and I just sat down on your couch in the morning and started writing that one scene. And then I just keep writing. And at the end of 9 months, I had a manuscript.
Right. So talk about that. Talk about, you have this manuscript and it seems like a huge accomplishment, but we both know what comes next. Talk about what comes next.
So, and I think it's one of those things that you're glad you don't know what you don't know when you start, because you might not do it. And so the idea of the biggest stumbling block for me, like, is hitting the end and knowing I still had 2 more books in the series, just as I was outlining, it became very clear very quickly that this was not going to end in one story. And I had outlined the 3 pieces. So that was sort of comforting in a way, because I knew where I was going. And then I had the knowledge that, yes, you could actually finish something. And then, I pitched it at the Writer's Digest conference. I went there and there's a pitch slam. It's like speed dating with agents. You sit in front of them for 2 minutes and you get to pitch your story, live. And what I got out of that were 5 cards from agents saying they wanted, 3 chapters, 50 pages, whatever, from everybody. So the concept I knew was good. And then I got home and I thought, oh God, this is not ready. This is a first draft. I can't send this to anybody. What am I going to do? And so I hired an editor at that point, and we went through the manuscript, and I realized what editing really means, and that what a developmental edit looks like, and that you are actually really ripping your story back apart and reassembling it. And it's a terrifying process the first time you do it. It's as terrifying as thinking you're stuck in the middle of the story, you don't know how to end it. But once I worked through that and realized, no, wait, this, it's better now, and the ideas for how to make it better start to flow, it was a very satisfying process. So I did that. I repitched it to a few agents at a time, and then some small presses that didn't require an agent. And I got a couple of contract offers from small presses. And I looked at those and I said, I don't know if I want to follow not that I want to cut corners, but their timeline, their idea for cover art, their idea for interior design, their idea for how I can market and price and sell. I'm going to have to do a lot of that work anyway. So I kind of pulled the plug pretty quickly and said, I'm going to produce it myself. And so I used an independent publishing house called Wise Inc., and they sort of shepherded me through the process. And excellent. From there to here.
Yeah. So that was Horizon, your new book, Infinity. Tell us about the difference between having to go through the editing process the first time around and this time around.
Well, the first time around, I think I had several more developmental rounds than I did this time. I did that one round to just get it ready for the world to, kind of look at in a more professional way. And then with this book, I gave it to the editor, the developmental editor, pretty much as a first draft. But I said, I think I can make most of the changes in one big round, send it out to my beta readers, and then do another round. And it did work out that way. Like I understood what it was going to take and how much work was going to have to happen. So I was less intimidated by it. I still had a meltdown partway through and had that moment of,
I remember.
Yeah. And, it's falling apart. I don't know how I'm going to put it back together again. And I have no good ideas and I'm terrible. And I was a one-hit wonder and I'll never write another thing. But I got through that.
The classic writer's insecurity.
Yes.
I stink. I totally stink. Who the hell's going to want to read this?
Stop now. Get a new career. So,
yeah.
But it was also, I had the knowledge that I'd done it before, and it was as painful that time. And it's still, and so now it was as painful, but I had that, once you've been through something, you have the knowledge that you can get through it again. So I did get through it. And I got a pretty tight timeline too. So that was
right.
And
are you able to have some distance from your characters during the editing phase?
Yeah, you have to have distance from the characters. And with the first book, the good thing about having a really good editor and really good beta readers who will give you the honest feedback is you are too close. You're too close to your story. You're too close to your characters. They're characters that you created out of your fantasy world. My main male character is like, I made him, yep, just how I wanted. And, right? And a lot of people didn't like him. And that was
They thought he was an asshole.
They thought he was an asshole.
Right?
Yeah. Oh dear, I have to fix this because that's not my intention. Yeah, he's kind of a badass, but no, you want to be, I want you to attach to him and root for him and so I had to, that was a big piece of my rewrite with the first book, was making him a more likable character. So what I ended up doing is I aged him up 10 years. I said, all right, that part of him that's that kind of cocky, you know, whatever, is who he was, and then his work in the Alliance and all the things that he's had to do to bring him to this point to be the commander of the unit and the, you know, the spy that he is, led him to here. But he's a much more responsible, much more, you know, heartfelt character. So I think that works pretty well. And then in the second one, in Infinity, I was really focusing on that, and I, you know, and I really got good feedback about Derek. And then Kaylee was just, you know, a whiner. And I thought, what the heck, you know, so strong and solid in the first one. And the thing is I didn't really notice it so much until very recently. And so, you know, when you get your arc, I have the arc right here. That's the advanced reader code. Show you. Here it is. You get that, and you know you have to do one more proofread through because you're going to catch things, and that's the whole point of getting, you know, the hard copy. And so you see it in book form when you don't see it in a document or when you don't see it in an e-reader. So, so I found a few things. That was great. And as I'm reading, I'm like, dear God, she sobs all the time. She's crying constantly. I can't stand her. She's like, what's up, girl? You know, you've got work to do. And so I called my editor at something else. I was like, can I make a few little content changes, like just deleting some words? And she's like, yeah, go ahead, that's fine. So I deleted a bunch of sobbing, which I hope to make her, you know, but you never really finish. So that's the other thing. At some point you have to say,
it's done. And
it's the best I can make it. And
right.
You know, the world can respond to it, and I'll do a better job with the next book.
Right. So let's talk about Kaylee and Derek and their romance, their relationship. You've gotten a lot of compliments on how well it worked. Tell us why it was important for you to include that relationship in the book.
Well, that's sort of the central piece. Is, you know, she has lost everything. You know, her society has been completely decimated. Her people have, you know, there's been a genocide, and she's one of the few survivors left. And so she then joined a resistance movement to kind of, you know, overthrow this government, and then had to flee. So she's lost everything. She's lost her civilization, and then she's lost the new community that she, you know, made for herself. And she's out on her own, and she comes out of hiding to save this person because that's sort of her intrinsic nature. She's a healer. That's what she does. And in the course of the time that they spend together, she shares with him her life journey. And so they become much closer, much more quickly, because that's the empathic thing that she has. So they do sort of fall in love, but it's not a like, oh, we're going to run off and, you know, and happily ever after. It's sort of like, well, we know we have these feelings for one another, but you've got to go back to your job. You got to stay, you know, get you off this planet. There's more to do. So I tried to make the intensity of it real, you know, and real because they really were inside each other's head. And so there's an intimacy there. And then I also tried to say, but we're not going to make it a happy ever after thing right now because there's still more to do. But it was important to me. I mean, these are human stories. I said I purposely made a human story, and humans fall in love, and humans have hope. I hope they have hope. I want them to. So, you know, my characters have hope. My characters want a better life. They want, you know, that's what they're working for. So building in an adult romantic relationship just felt like honest, you know, that gives the story honesty and integrity.
Did you know from the beginning that you were going to have that element, or did it develop? Yeah.
No, I knew that was going to be a central theme of it. Her society's issue was one of them, like that the empathic thing. Mm-hmm. This other race of beings that are now there's kind of the greater threat out there. That was another big theme of it. And Derek and Kaylee's relationship was the third piece.
Yeah. Plus, they're both pretty hot, so it was sort of inevitable.
He is
probably love with Derek. When you can create a character, you can make them, you know, be whatever you want. That's pretty cool about being a writer, is you get to be in charge of all that. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Marcus. How fun was it to write a villain?
Oh, it was really fun, actually.
And give us a little synopsis of Marcus, actually.
So he, what we learn about him through book 1 and book 2 is that he's the Amafi Society, and they're the ones that are the non-genetically altered. They're not empathic. You don't know why for the first book. You know a lot more by the second book. But the threat, you know, he's very threatened by them. And you do find out that some of that threat was not unfounded. It's misplaced, but it's not unfounded in it. So think about it. There's a society of people that live right next door that could read minds, but they can do things with their mind that you can't do. If they're not so ethical and moral in their rule book, basically, that could be a disaster for the others. So, that fear-based, they can do something we can't do. They have things we don't have. That fear was real. And he capitalized on that and ended up, going in and wiping out their civilization, but taking enough of the people for his own use, basically. So he was really fun to make. I tried to make him multi-dimensional. It was harder to do in the first book because he just had to be a villain, and there wasn't a lot of time spent on him. And when you did see him, it was him doing awful things to promote his cause. But in the second book, I tried to put a few scenes in there where you got into his head a little bit, where he had a vision for building his society. He knew they were part of something at one time, and he's trying to create and bring them back to that. And he sees these people as a threat.
Talk about the charismatic piece of him, how important that is.
He's charismatic. People follow him. And you see some of his soldiers who were, become part of the resistance movement. They were very disillusioned. They said, we followed his vision. We believed what he said about having a greater society. And he actually was trying to build that, and then he has them without many of the actual city itself. Really, the civilians didn't really know that they were going to go over there and do this. And his soldiers, some of them, it really devastated them. And so, so it was his charisma that made people follow him.
Charisma, yeah.
Yeah, he had charisma.
Yeah.
I think that comes through. I hope it does. And
it absolutely does. Yeah.
Trying to make him multidimensional was my trick, and I tried to bring that more, all the things I couldn't quite get into the first book because the story hadn't developed that far, I tried to, deal with in the second book.
Yeah. I had heard on NPR, a guy who was in like a very, very extremist jihadist group wrote a book about the characteristics that these leaders have. And he talked about like they have a clear vision.
Yes.
And they're salesmen. They're selling their vision, and it's something to believe in.
Right.
And so it's interesting. You were talking about hope, how you want hope in your book. Like people following Marcus
had hope.
They're coming from hope, even though it's this sort of what we see as a destructive attitude.
Yeah, it's a twisted kind of a thing, but and he played on fear, which is another thing that they do. He played on the fears. These people are a threat. We need to wipe them out. But what he did, and what his mistake was, is that when he wiped out the civilization, and he brought mostly young women and children. So the children, he integrated them into the society, basically, because I think he knew that his own people wouldn't tolerate it if he was, putting them in like concentration camp kind of settings. Mm-hmm. So he integrated them into the civilization, but kept them monitored. And I think that was a mistake too, because they became real, to the other people, and then what they'd suffered became very real. And so he started to lose some of his moral authority and some of his, that's where the resistance the resistance was beginning before that. They saw that he was, instead of leading, he was ruling, and they were starting to have those kernels. And then this sort of solidified that, this is not what we want for ourselves. And we were one people, and why we're not one people anymore, we're not sure, but, we know we come from the same. So.
And that's that broader theme that space operas have.
Right.
That, good versus evil, and moving towards something bigger.
Right.
And so we've got to get you some kudos for a fabulous award you won. You entered the Writer's Digest 2016 self-published, contest for self-published books, and you won the whole damn thing, not just for science fiction. So tell us, you had said before that you started off pitching this thing at a Writer's Digest conference a couple of years ago. Tell us what's happening now because of this award. And
well, that day, I entered it into a couple of, because when you go indie, you've sort of bypassed the gatekeeper of getting an agent and having your book purchased by a publishing house. And I mean, I did have the 2 contracts that were offered. So 2 small houses were willing to put their name behind me. So that was good for me to know. That felt, validating to me, but nobody else knew that really, unless I tell my whole story. So, it's hard to have validation. There's different ways you have to find your validation when you decide to take on the indie, to go down the indie path. And so some of, awards are a good way to do that, because they really are nice. That's fine. And so Writer's Digest are sort of like the gold standard. So I had entered that one, and I entered a couple of others, and it won the finalist in the science fiction category in 2 other contests. And then I sort of didn't expect really to hear from Writer's Digest, and I get the email, and it says, congratulations. And it's like, oh, it must have, won, maybe it won runner-up in science fiction or something like that. And then it says, you won the grand prize. And I just kept reading that one line over and over, you won the grand prize. And I'm like, they mean me? Well, they must mean me because they have my email and they sent it to me and they have my book title. So clearly this isn't a mistake, but it was a couple of hours of me staring at the screen. I wouldn't even tell anybody yet because I thought, okay, they're going to retract this. They're going to be like, nope, sorry, that wasn't for you, But
it was that other Horizon, that other Tabitha Lord who wrote that other book.
Exactly.
Horizon, in the alternate universe.
Yes. And in my world, my fantasy world, that could be true. So, right. So I finally accepted it in my mind, and it was so exciting. And I'm actually speaking at their conference this summer. I have a couple of programs I'm presenting. One on a panel for world building for science fiction and fantasy. I am presenting on some indie author topics, and which is really exciting. They've asked me to write a couple blogs for them, and I've since been invited to go speak at another writers conference in Philadelphia next spring. So, it's opened some doors for sure. And I signed with a literary manager just recently because of that. He saw me do an interview in December, and I had somebody mentioned the award, and he, that's a big deal. And this must be a good story. So, are you interested in trying to take this to another level? And I said, well, what do you have in mind? And so we're talking about what that could look like. So over the next year or so.
Yeah. So in your mind, are you at the point where you consider yourself an author?
Reluctantly, yes. Yeah. When people ask me what I do, I say I'm a writer. And, and then they ask, are you making a living at that? Well, not exactly. But I kind of, and there's a blog post in here somewhere too about the myth of overnight success. When people actually, win an award or, hit a bestseller list or those sorts of things. Wow, they're so lucky, or they don't realize all of the background work that's gone into that, and that success sort of snowballs on itself. And I'm starting to feel the momentum build behind this career, which is really nice. And I still have further to go, obviously, but I definitely feel enough momentum. And when I finished the second book, not even just the draft, that was enough for me to say, okay, you can do this now. That you're not a one-hit wonder. You have, you have more stories in your mind. And I do. I have a whole file full of, book ideas. And of course, there's a book 3 to this one, so I have to finish that first.
So we have a question from Rick. It says, Kaylee looks like you, and I can answer it too. Kind of she does. Kind of
a little. I mean, it's just.
What do you perceive as the differences?
Okay, so who I actually, for one blog thing that I did for a blog tour, somebody asked me to cast them from famous people, and I had trouble with Derek because he's somebody else from my real life that I sort of know ish, like a version of that person, and so it couldn't be
nice compliment.
Looks wise, he is. Well, it's somebody no one knows. I can't go there. But Kaylee, Lily James, Cinderella, the Cinderella that played in the live action one just recently. She's got that curly, so she's this little but yet fierce kind of a character. She's very, she's a very prominent feature. She's not. I don't know. I thought that's how I picture her more or less. With blue eyes though.
Yeah. So, Infinity, give us a tease for Infinity.
Okay. So when we left Horizon, Derek had convinced Kaylee to leave the world because if she goes back to the Resistance, they're looking for her. They know that she knows she has information, and they'll get it out of her. And that there's just they have their ways. And so she's left to protect them. And when he's rescued from his ship Horizon, he convinces her to come and says, we can keep an eye on your world from there. You were probably once a colony anyway, and we a lost colony kind of a thing. And so she goes, and she gets drawn into some of the intrigue and things that are going on in the greater world, which will eventually loop back and have direct impact on her world. But we've left, you know, an open-ended, there's a resistance movement, there's a civil war imminent on her planet that's not resolved. So when Infinity opens, that's basically the premise, is going and figuring that part out.
Okay,
and
we
get
can't.
a lot of backstory of her, how they became the way they are.
Right. You know what? See your backstory. I read Horizon, and I read, you know, your earlier draft of Infinity. I thought you did an amazing job of giving just a little bit, so that if you, people who read Infinity most likely read Horizon, but if they didn't, you were able to kind of sprinkle that through. How hard was that? How did you do it? How much help did you get?
Well, that's one of those things with the editing. I completely scrapped my first 3 chapters and started those and did those again. I mean, completely scrapped chapter 1. And, you know, so when I was originally doing it, I had to retell and kind of get in what I thought readers needed to know from the first book. And I did it in just a really cliche, sort of boring way. And I thought, but I knew the parts. So then I at least had them down. And then I thought, well, the first book, and my editor actually said, your first book opened with an action theme. This one is opening with like people having dialogue about, isn't it so sad what happened on the planet? And, you know, and he's talking to his dad and explaining why, you know, it's like, and I'm like, yeah, you're right, I know. You hate it when you know that they're right? So I scrapped that first, you know, bit and rewrote it, and then just took the pieces I knew you needed and sort of sprinkled them in there. But it was easier to do as a second draft that way. I don't know, it was a little tricky because I ended up cutting out big chunks of things that I thought were important, but really when I took them out, you still got enough. I think you still got enough to know the main point of the first book. And then the backstory is really the set, what happened, you know, 1,000 years ago in her world. And that was a risk.
Right.
That was a risk doing it the way I did it. I had read another writer that I like. She had done something similar where she took, well, her characters were actually long-living creatures. So, you know, she actually was taking the same character and you were getting the backstory, you know, 500 years ago, 200 years ago, whatever it was. And I thought, well, this is a completely different storyline, but it's important. And I think it relates. I mean, I've gotten no bad feedback about that part. So
no, it was good. It was good.
And I think it creates relevance and it loops her world into the greater galaxy and what's going on out there in a very real and clear and present danger kind of way. So,
and that element also fits in with it being a space opera. That's the sort of epic thing that's stretching through time, and you know, the seeds of it start long, long ago, but it's kind of has this like fateful inevitability sort of to it.
Right.
Speaking of space operas, we've got to talk about Star Wars. Your love of Star Wars.
I know. I actually bought a Princess Leia T-shirt to wear to Comic-Con, the last one I was at, and I just it was. You know, I was 7 years old when it came out, and I went to see it with my dad, and I'm sure I've written blog posts about this. I've spoken this many times, but
tell us again.
It impacted every part of my life, from the way I played to the way my imagination. It touched me, and it touched me at an age where that's so, you know, it's so powerful. And the music, I had a record player, which tells you how old I am, and then I had the soundtrack, the John Williams soundtrack, and I played it every night at bedtime and listened to that epic music. And I had all the action figures, and I had all the spaceships, and I had everything, and I liked to do my hair like that weird way. And when I went to my very first Comic-Con, I was like, oh, my God, the collection I had, you know. But, you know,
wow, yeah.
And I think that's always been, so for me, you know, writers, I went to one, I heard one speaker say, you know, that writers are always, you have a theme that you work with. You know, there's some theme, not always, but in general, you're working with a theme that you're playing with in your own real world somehow, even if it's subconscious, and you're working out, what is that? You know, you're trying to work out something about your own world, and it comes out sometimes in your writing. And for me, I really thought about that. I play with that idea of what does it mean to be a hero? You know, like who, and the times in history that I'm really attracted to, or that I have this real connection with, it's what those people did at a time when it was, you know, dire that they did it, or the world would be a very different place. And I think about World War, I often say that Horizon and Infinity 2 is, you know, the resistance movement during World War II set in space. that it's this do or die. It's that important that we take a stand, and some people do and some people don't. And why? They're the ones that do and the ones that don't.
Right.
And what quality is that in a person that has them stand up and fight or stand for their neighbor, and then who turns away? So that's kind of a theme that, I play with, and I obviously all those epic space operas have that. And so I think that's why I'm so attracted to them too. But it sparks your imagination. You look up at the stars and you say, what else is out there? And so I knew when I started writing, I may not only always write science fiction, but it was where I was going to start for sure.
Yeah. Plus, every single piece of trivia.
Yes.
Possible.
I beat my children. We have a Star Wars Trivial Pursuit game. Now, let me say this, only for episodes 4, 5, and 6. 1, 2, and 3, I just didn't invest the kind of energy into learning all of those quirky robot names and spaceship designations and how many stormtroopers or whatever. But I beat my kids every time we play Star Wars Trivial Pursuit. So.
Yeah. What did you think about the new two? So the new one and then Rogue One.
I really love them. I thought that the episode 7 was just in the spirit of the first one. Yes, the theme was similar. I mean, there's only so many ways you can defeat the Empire and bring the Empire back and whatever. But I really thought it was in the spirit of the first one, the humor that was there, and it had its own flavor. So I loved it. And Rogue One was just really, it was what I hoped it would be. It was dark. It was epic, and it set the stage for, it did just what you needed to do. It filled that gap,
Excellent. Let's see. This isn't really a question, but Horizon reminds me of the Ocean of Years series by Roger Allen McBride, who also wrote some of the SW books. I don't even know what that means, SW. Does that make sense to you?
Nope, but I might. It's my.
Star Wars, SW.
Sorry, Rick. That was you.
That was Rick.
Yes, thank you. That's the huge compliment. And I had one review of Horizon early on, and the person compared it to some of the earlier Star Trek novels. In the good,
cool.
That epic story. With the themes that were a little bit more than just crazy space creatures invading a planet. They had some themes to them. So that was a really big compliment. So.
Yeah. And you've dabbled in short story writing. Tell us how different that is from the process of writing a novel, and tell us about the entry that made it into the anthology Sirens.
So that one, first, I really enjoy writing short stories. They're sort of a thing I do when I finish a project, a big project, because it's the same satisfaction of completing a story arc in about a 1/9 of the time, because it takes me about 9 months to draft a novel. It takes me about a month to do a short story, and that includes pretty much editing too. So it's really a satisfying thing to create this story. It's also honed your skills. You really have to pare down and say what you want to say and get that arc right in there. So I think it's a very, from a craft perspective, it's a very useful thing to do. And I really enjoy doing it. And how I got the idea for Sirens, I was a classics major. And I had always sort of wanted to tell Penelope's story. Penelope is Odysseus's wife, and when he goes off to fight in the Trojan War and he's stranded, well, he's not really stranded, he's kind of kidnapped by
not really stranded.
Kind of kidnapped, and then he sort of stays on purpose because he's falling in love with this. Well, she's put a spell on him, but it's always questionable if he really wanted to leave or not. So he's with Calypso the Siren for like 7 years, and meanwhile Penelope is, or longer than that, 20 years, something very ridiculous. And she's at home raising their son from the time he's a baby, and now he's becoming a man. And the suitors want the land. It's in Ithaca. It's a big piece of property. He was royalty. So the suitors want to marry her so that they can have this land. And so she's held down the fort. She's been, there's not a lot of her in the Odyssey, but it's very iconic, and she weaves the tapestry, and then she says, when I finished, weaving the tapestry, that's when I'll make a decision. And every night she goes in and unravels it. And that's a big, iconic classical image. And so I thought she was always so interesting. There had to be more than her, to survive that long, to raise a kid, to run a kingdom, basically, in a male-dominated world. She had to be much more than just a little clever, So I've always wanted to explore her character. And so Sirens came out, and I thought, well, Calypso is the siren who kidnaps Odysseus. And there's some lore that says Penelope herself, her mother was, I think, a naiad So she has some lore there that she may have been partly magical. So I actually capitalized on that a little bit, and I created this one piece of the story, which was his homecoming and how she orchestrated it in a way. Odysseus' homecoming. So that was really fun. That's a long-winded answer for a short question, but and I've written another one that I've recently been asked, which is a really nice thing. So, you know, you can submit your stories to open anthologies, and then, you know, they choose you or they don't. But sometimes you can be asked to contribute, and based on they don't even know what you're going to write, but they trust you as a writer. And so I've been invited to do 2 in the next 6 months. So
congratulations!
Thank you. So one will be like a horror kind of a thing, and the other one is straight up sci-fi. So that'll be fun. And I've written another one that's on submission right now. I haven't heard yet, so they're fun.
Yay! So tell us where people can get Horizon, when Infinity's coming out, and how to find you on social media.
Okay, so Horizon is on Amazon. You know, you can get it on all the outlets. It's available as an ebook or a print book. I do go to a lot of events. So I'll be at Boston Comic-Con this summer, Rhode Island Comic-Con in November. I'll be at the Writers' Digest conference for that. And the Big E in September. So I have a bunch of, places I'm going to sign the book where you can get that. But you can get it online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble online, all the iBook, ebook, electronic, all of those formats, you can get it. And Infinity will be up for pre-sale next week. So it'll be ready for pre-orders next week. And it will be released on June 6th.
Excellent. And where do people find you on social media? What are you on? And
T Lord Author.
What's your
my Twitter handle? T Lord Author. I am Tabitha Lord on what's that other one? Facebook. and I'm fine for people to friend me personally too, as Tabitha Lord Jorgensen, because I post more on my personal page, and I do a lot of crossover stuff. So I'm good with either or both. And I have an Instagram account, and that's also, I think, Tabitha Lord on Instagram. Those are the 3 that I maintain well. I have a few others, but those
excellent. So what's next for Tabitha Lord Author?
Well, I've got to write these short stories, and when you release a book and you're an indie, you have a lot of work to do in promoting yourself and in blog touring and figuring out all the marketing and promo and that sort of thing. So I have a 49-stop blog tour coming starting in May.
What were you thinking?
I didn't organize it. I paid somebody to organize it, and it's good. I mean, you want that. It's just, it comes with a lot of homework, because often they want blurbs, they want interviews, which is wonderful. I love doing it, but it's time consuming. So I'll be doing that for the next couple months, as well as writing those short stories, as well as doing some speaking engagements. And then I got to get cracking on book 3. Yeah.
How well formed is book 3 now? Like, what kind of outline do you have in your head?
I have where it starts and where it needs to end, and that's about it. But and I've been playing around with it, and I can't say too much because I don't want to ruin the reveal that readers will get in book 2. But I don't want to do and let's just blow them up. Let's blow up the Death Star. I don't want it to be that way with this of the story. I want there to be some more complexity to it. So I'm really having to think about, what does that look like when you've created a big bad enemy? How do you then humanize them enough to create sympathy or complexity to the storyline? So that's what I'm thinking. I'm swirling about right now.
Right.
And being very, very clear in my mind. And when you read the ending of this one, you'll know where it's potentially open for the 3rd one. I have it's interesting because always I have these like anchor scenes in my mind when I'm thinking about it. In Horizon, I had the crash scene. I had a scene at the bar where they're trying to lure the arms dealer back to the room. I had that scene very clearly in my mind. I had the march back to, and there was just a few that were just there, and I knew they were going to be there, and they really weren't subject to change in the way that other pieces of the plot were, because they sort of anchored parts of the story in a way that's important to me. And so I had some for Infinity as well, and I have a couple already for books that I don't have a name for yet. But so.
Right. So it sounds to me like those are the scenes that if one of these was turned into a movie, those would be absolutely essential.
I think they would. And I think readers might then pluck out different ones now too, in addition to that, because now in service to the story, you mess with the plot. But by the time you get to the end where you're happy with the plot because it serves the story, there are more of those anchoring themes, I think. And so, people might pick out more of them. But for me, just as I'm creating, there are those ones that I just see in my mind so clearly. And sometimes I'll write them. Usually I write sequentially, but every once in a while I'll jump out and I'll create that. And it might not quite fit by the time I get there, and I'll have to doctor it up a little bit. But, I'll definitely, it's usually, I don't usually cut those at all. So.
Yeah. So any words of wisdom for anybody listening who has one of these ideas tumbling around and thinks they might want to begin writing?
Just do it, and don't worry about the editing piece, and don't worry about what you're going to do with it. Just enjoy the creative process of writing. If you have a story, get it out and just do it and create a discipline if you really want to do it. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, I want to write a book. I've always wanted to write a book. And well, we all want to do a lot of things, and then you just either do it or you don't. And so the discipline of having, a regular habit of writing is helpful. So, but, a first draft is better than no draft,
You got to start somewhere.
Right.
Right. Well, Tabitha, thank you for joining us. It's been absolutely wonderful, and we wish you the absolute best of luck with Infinity.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.